Welcome back. I've got Glenn Wood on the line. Glenn, how are you today?
Fantastic. How are you, Michael?
I am awesome. Really been looking forward to this conversation for a bit. So why don't you share a little bit about you and then we're going to jump into the conversation.
Sure. It's great to be here. We just published a book. It's called Too Big to Care. And some of you might have heard of Too Big to Fail. But Too Big to Care is a result of some of the experiences that I went through. I was in financial services for about 20 years. And my son was born in 2015. It was an emergency situation. The doctors were calling, come to the hospital right away. I approached my company about taking some time off to go and be with my family at an emergency situation. And they basically said, no, get back to your desk. And eventually I was fired for taking the time off. And that's kind of what started this movement and this dream in me to kind of support not only parental rights, but let's take a look at what is really driving business in 2025. What makes your business thrive in 2025?
Yeah, I hear stories all the time about people that are afraid to take time off of work for a variety of reasons. A sick loved one, or the passing of a loved one, that it's like, no, sorry, we can't give you the time off. It's inhumane, quite frankly, and it's disgusting, and it's also why so many people are so disgruntled. I mean, I know Gartner does a study year after year of the people that are engaged at work, and that number keeps getting smaller and smaller because people want to be treated like human beings and not like widgets or, you're our top asset. Well, you know what? This pen is an asset, but I'm not going to treat this pen like I would, a fellow human being. I mean, it's useful. I mean, I'm going to use it for what it's designed for, but I'm also going to take care of the pen. I'm not going to be, throw it around or smack it or anything like that. Same thing with a human being. Things happen, and in a situation, especially as a parent, or a caregiver, and we saw that during the pandemic where so many people became caregivers, or they weren't able to see their parents before they passed away because there was travel restrictions or who knows, all kinds of different things. And the sign of companies, it's like, nope, sorry, get back to your desk. That's not a company that I'd want to work for. It's like, you know what? I'll go flip burgers, and I'm not diminishing that job at all. But I'm like, look,
Right.
I could be six-figure plus salary, but you know what? No, you know what? Screw that. I'm going to go take a minimum wage job because, quite frankly, I'm going to be treated better than I'm being treated here. And it shouldn't be that way, but we see it time and time and time again. And unfortunately, you had to live it in real time. So it kind of, birthed, the need, for, the work that you do in this book. So, you know,
Thank you. That's right.
let's walk through the book. And I always ask authors this, but I know the reason why you wrote the book. A lot of times people write a book, whether it's a leadership book or a how-to book or a self-care book or whatever it happens to be. And time again, it's like, well, personal live stories. I felt that there was a message that needed to be shared and all of that, which is, painfully obviously in your situation. But when you were, doing the book, walk us through that process of, okay, now I'm going to write this book. And obviously you want to tell your story, but my hunch is you talked to a lot of different people and got to hear their stories as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Michael. That's right. Yeah. So we did a lot of research in the book. And actually, this is the third book I wrote on this topic. It's the first one I published. So the first book was really about my experience because I went through, it's been 10 years now since my situation started. My son's now 10 years old. But the reason I published this book is I really felt I wanted to move the needle forward. I wanted to make sure that my kids never get the same response that I got when they asked to take some time off for family. And, I found that there's just so much disingenuous behavior out there that we talk about sustainability, for example, and we talk about ESGs and SDGs and CSR. There's all this alphabet soup out there. At the end of the day, managers, people on the ground don't really know what to do. And they think they're doing the right thing, but there's really no guidebook. There's no standard in place of, this is kind of what you got to do. And then there's all this politicalization of the whole issue, right? And as soon as you politicalize one of these things, whether it's ESG or sustainability, then it's ruined, frankly. You can't give this to politicians. This is something that deals with humans and with human rights, and it's real. So My call in the book is just let's make this real. This isn't a left or a right issue. It's a cross the aisle issue. It's right down the center. If you don't allow people to have a career and a family, then you're not going to have a sustainable business in 2025. If you don't put people first, then you're not going to have a sustainable business in 2025. And I can go through myriad of examples. Let's just take a really blatant one. If you come in as a manager and you fire all the pregnant women, okay, let's take a look at that scenario. Maybe 50 years ago that might have been okay, but what's going to happen today? Well, you're going to have a very demotivated group of people in your office to start with. They're not going to want to come to work. So productivity is going to tank. You're not going to be able to hire women because women aren't going to want to work for your company. And so there goes half of the workforce right there. You're not going to be able to hire the best and the brightest because the best and the brightest aren't going to want to work for a company like that. How are your customers going to feel, Michael? Well, they're not going to feel very engaged about your product. And if your customers aren't fans of your products, if your employees aren't wanting to come to work when they wake up in the morning, you're not going to succeed in 2025. Not to mention the investors. How are the investors going to take a look at your company, right? You have an unmotivated workforce, productivity is tanking, and your customers don't like you. Well, hello, your cost of equity is going to go through the roof, which means that you're not going to be competitive in the marketplace anymore. So this isn't just about tree hugging, Michael. This is about if you care about the bottom line of your company in 2025, what I wrote in this book is kind of the bottom line. This is what you got to do. And that's the approach I took. And I really hope it moves the needle. I hope it helps the global kind of corporate community as well as governments, frankly, because this isn't limited to corporations. It's any organization that's trying to succeed and thrive in 2025.
Yeah, you have to take care of your people for them to take care of your customers or your clients or however you identify the people that buy your products and services. If you don't take care of your people first, you're not going to have a company. And stat that I'm sure you're familiar with, and I've seen it and shared it on the show quite a few times. From the year 2000, over 52% of the Fortune 500 companies from the year 2000 are either gone or were acquired by another company. So you think about that, and it's like, and you look at that, it's like, well, how could over half of the Fortune 500 be gone a quarter century later? It's like, well, what happened? Well, there's a lot of reasons. Competition for one, but I'm guessing a good component of it is they lost their way, and that can be not treating people right, not recruiting the best, not retaining the best, and we've seen it time again, especially during the pandemic when we saw a lot of female executives during the pandemic. They kind of took a look in the mirror and they went, you know what, family's more important, so I'm going to step away from this role. Now that pissed me off on multiple levels. One, and I've shared on my story too. The first job I ever had was at a grocery store, and my manager and my manager's manager were female, and didn't think two things about it. I'm like, okay, they're female, great. Okay, they're my managers. All right, what do I need to do? Okay, fine. And until I got a little bit older, I started recognizing the challenges that females have had in the workplace, the glass ceiling, the compensation indifference, all of those things that are going on. So when I started hearing, okay, female executives that have finally broken through, and we're getting closer to an equitable playing field. Going, I'm just going to walk away from it. What pissed me off most about that is they shouldn't have had to make that choice.
That's right.
They
That's
could
right.
have had both and
That's
should
right.
have both.
That's right.
And they felt that they couldn't. And I'm like, what kind of world are we in when we have to have that as a choice? We have to choose between your career desires and your family. You should be able to do both. And it's the way, and I've said this and other people said on my show too, is the way that we work isn't working and we need to adjust it. And that's why your book is so critically important. Obviously, with the personal story is, the backdrop and kind of the foundation of it, but your story, unfortunately, your story's not alone. There's been a lot of people that have gone through
That's
maybe
right.
similar things or maybe a little bit different, but have to you make a choice, and you shouldn't have to do that. Or people are afraid to
Absolutely.
take time off because when they come back, no one did their work, so they've got 2 or 3 weeks or even longer worth of work to catch up on top of the overwhelming amount of work that they have to do normally. That all of a sudden you're like, why bother? Why I should just reset and start again, which again, you start having companies have that constant turnstile of people, they're going to join that 52%, and that company's going to be
Exactly.
gone sooner than later.
That's right. Absolutely. So, at the end of the day, it's about maximizing use of capital, right? So this is where really sustainability comes in, and I write about this in the book. But there's all sorts of capital. Like you showed your pen a few minutes ago, right? That's one form of capital. But let's take a look at it. So there's what kind of capital? Well, there's financial capital, obviously, right? And that's the one we talk about the most. That who's got the money and who doesn't have the money, and how much money do we have, and how efficient is our use of financial capital, and what's our return on investment, and so on and so forth. But then we've got resource capital, right? So what resources are we using in the business? And are we using those in an efficient, optimized way? And many times businesses I've found through my research aren't even asking that question. And obviously to be sustainable, that's a core question. Stuff that we used to think was trash is now an important product for us, right? So let's take a look at how we use resources. But then thirdly, and most important, the one that should come first, Michael, is as we've been discussing, is human capital. And human capital is your most precious resource. It's the one that you need to protect. It's the one that has to come first. It's the one that you have to know as a manager is how efficiently you're utilizing the human capital that you have. What kind of human capital do you have? And how have you chosen that human capital? And it's just so ironic that we find businesses spending millions and millions of dollars to hire just the right person. And then they bring them in and treat them like crap. And they don't give them the responsibilities that they need. And then when they have a family emergency, they don't let them take that time. And then they find that person working for the competition. So, this isn't rocket science, right? You treat people right. You put them first. You hire the best and the brightest and you let them do their job, right? That's what Steve Jobs talked about. And it's still true today. And, we find a really sad example in Japan. I've lived in Japan for many years. And if you look at the demographic situation of Japan today, you've got Japan's population decreasing by 1 million people a year. 1 million people a year. So just think about that. Think about how many cities in the US that you know that have about 1 million people. So one of those cities is disappearing every year in Japan. So why is that? Well, since the end of the war, since they started this economic miracle, we call it, this drive, where employees are deemed the property of the company, right? Since we've started that, we really haven't changed the way we manage people. We haven't changed the way we treat people. People aren't allowed to have a family and continue their career. So what's the choice then? Well, the choice is to not have a family. And that's where we get this demographic situation of a decrease of 1 million people a year. And that's where we will head if we don't embrace these policies of simply treating people right, of allowing them to have work-life balance, allowing them to have both a family and a career. And I think it's very simple.
We're not, well, we're not seeing numbers quite like that yet in the States, but we are in a way because the millennial generation, they started having kids, but Generation Z, and I have, three children, adult children that are that age. My oldest is like, I'm not having kids. And my middle daughter, she's pretty much you kids. And my youngest is on the spectrum, so I don't think they're necessarily interested in starting a family. So my former wife, their mom, probably not too happy about not being a grandmother. For me, I'm like, no, you got to do what's right for you. But when you start running into the situation where there's, excuse me, where there's, lots of people deciding not to have a family, that is a huge problem down the road. Not just
It
not
is.
just from a taxation standpoint, but just, communities. Like you said, I live in a community, and I split my time between San Diego and Toronto, and the part in the community that I'm in Toronto, that subsection of Toronto, has a population of just over 1 million people. So thinking about that, saying my town would be gone in a year. It's like
Obvious.
that's
It's obvious.
alarming. And again, as people age out and retire, all of a sudden there's going to be this, demand of services. There's no people to do them. So the people that are there working, guess what? they're working too many hours. They can't even think about having a family. Oh, their mom or their dad or their uncle or their spouse gets sick. Suck it up. Too bad. We don't have anybody to cover for you. You can't go deal with them. They need to be taken to the hospital. Sorry, you're gonna have to find somebody else. Well, who are you gonna find? Everybody else is doing the same thing you are. So I used to work in healthcare years ago, and people asked about the healthcare system and all that, and I said, my advice to people: don't get sick. It's simplistic, but there's meaning behind it. It's like the system has some issues and it's being overused too much because of a variety of different factors. That's a completely different conversation, but ultimately it boils down to the experiences that you're seeing in Japan are being mimicked in other parts of the world as well, and it's there's a reckoning coming, and unless we get ahead of it and we cut out the political noise and we go, like you said, right down the path to say, what is the issue? How
Right.
do we solve this? What's the mechanisms here? There's a lot of ingredients, but it's fairly simple. Create work that people can work and live and not work in order to live.
Yeah.
It's a huge challenge. We've seen it it's not new. It's not like 2025 that said, "Oh wow, we have this problem." This has been building for a long time, like in the case you mentioned in Japan, after the end of World War II and the Great Rebuild and everything that happened, they've just been nose to the grind on it and financially speaking has done well. But from a human capital side of things, it's like the cost of that is atrocious.
Totally. That's right. If you think about it, I like to think about it kind of as, what does capitalism mean today? So, people talk about, well, private ownership of property, or people talk about, making as much money as you can make. And there's all sorts of images. But I think if we look back and we kind of think about what is really at the heart of capitalism, what does capitalism mean? Well, I think it's twofold. I think the contract is twofold. First, it's obviously to create a product or service which generates outsized profits on a continual basis. So it's a product or service that's in demand, that is different, that has some value add, that generates profits on an ongoing basis. The second half of that contract, however, seems to be the one that we've forgotten, Michael, and that is really to add extraordinary value to society. If a company is doing those two things on a consistent basis, I would argue it's going to be extraordinarily successful and is going to be a very strong company. And those two I think are mutually they're joined. They're not mutually exclusive. They're inseparable, right? So if you ask yourself that question as a company or as a manager, or for that matter, as a government official, what are we doing? Yes, we're generating tax revenues as a country, but are we adding extraordinary value to society? Are we allowing people to have children and a career? When there is a family emergency, do employees feel at ease to take the time that they need and then come back and resume their job? Yes or no? And unfortunately, I found through my research in the book that many times the answer to that is no, and that is leading to problems. And however beautiful the brochure we produce as a company that says all the wonderful investments we're making in people and CSR, the fact is if your people on the ground don't feel valued, if they don't feel like they have work-life balance, when they wake up in the morning, if they're not excited about coming to their job, then you're going to have a problem.
It reminds me of a real life example. My spouse, a colleague of her, actually, she's her pseudo boss, basically. Well, her pseudo boss's mother passed away about a month ago overseas, so they had the funeral arrangements finally, and she was out of the country for a couple of weeks, and my wife went in earlier for the 2 weeks to help do the work for, her boss on top of her work. So when her boss came back, she didn't have 2 weeks worth of work. And that was okayed by management, encouraged. They gave a lot of leeway. It's like, okay, we're gonna, keep tabs on this and make sure that, obviously you're gonna get paid for it. But also, when it's quieter, we're gonna look at this and say, okay, it's the afternoon on a Friday, go home. We're still gonna pay you, but go home kind of thing. So that was a whole everybody coming together to take care of a fellow colleague that was dealing with a situation of loss of a loved one. So it's kind of the opposite situation of what you experience, where so her today was the first day back for her, and I talked to my spouse a little while ago, and she said, yep. Only thing she had to do is tidy up a couple things. So she probably had maybe a day's worth of work. She's gone for 2 weeks. So that should be able to get addressed by the end of the week or early next week, and it'll be as if she never left. It's like
Right.
that's how it's done, people. And too many organizations, I saw this after the Great Recession in the US in, '07, '08, '09, and 10, where a lot of organizations laid off a ton of people, and then the surviving people, congratulations, you still have a job, but you're going to be doing the work for all these other people. And, we'll start bringing them back. Spoiler alert, they didn't. So, and it's just been getting worse and worse and worse to the point where everybody's like, I have too much to do. From a positivity standpoint, it's like I get to go to work. It's a mindset thing. However, you shouldn't be abused when you go to work. And having too much of a workload, you're not going to do great work. And if you're not doing great work, that kind of robs us from, why we go to work in the first place. We have skills, we have gifts, we have desires. We want to do things well, and we
That's
want
right.
to we want to thrive. And when we
That's right.
go into an environment where that is not allowed, because of all the mechanisms in place, no
Crushing.
wonder we have people leaving and want just not showing up, or they're there but they're not.
That's right. And, unfortunately, in many large corporations in particular, HR has turned into this kind of trap, right? So if anybody phones HR or HR hears of any sort of issue, quote, issue with an employee, then actually the employees are targeted and kind of pushed out the door. And as I was going through my experience with Mitsubishi and Morgan Stanley, and I made it public, I just received thousands of emails and letters from people around the world that were facing the same thing. That one lady had a little tumor on her throat, and she told her boss, I got to go and have a surgery, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks. I might not be able to use my throat for a while, but the doctor says I'm going to recover. And the boss says, yeah, okay, go ahead. The first day she comes back, she gets fired. Right. So, these are the type of stories I got time and time and time again. And I'm like, well, listen, people, why did we hire this lady in the first place? Because she's extraordinary. She's the right person for the job. We spent a lot of money looking for her and hiring her. So why would we dismiss her so easily? Why would we be so short-sighted? And why wouldn't we think, well, actually, because she went through that experience, she's going to be even a better employee. She's going to be a better manager. We look at corporations, they're spending millions of dollars on coaching and on sending their employees on management training courses. Well, Michael, what better management training program is there than becoming a parent? And why don't we embrace that? Why don't we embrace that and embrace those employees back? Frankly, the best manager I ever had was a guy who was a father of three kids, and he knew how to deal with people, and that's the first and foremost thing that you need for not only a manager but for anybody you hire in your company, right? You need people who are good at dealing with people, good communicators, easy to work with, somebody you want to sit beside on a long plane ride, right? And so, why are we then, because of some family emergency or because of some crisis, we all face crises, Michael, at some point in our life, in our career. We all do. Why are we so short-sighted so as to fire or discriminate or harass people that just happen to be going through an emergency? No, it's just the opposite. We need to embrace that. And the minute we do start embracing that, I think we'll see a real turnaround in how our companies are doing and how our understanding is of the very word sustainability. What does sustainability mean? Well, sustainability simply means that you're an ongoing concern. It's almost an oxymoron, right? Who would start a company and say, "Oh, I hope it dies tomorrow," right? So sustainability is just saying, I'm going to do the things today that make sure that my company is an ongoing concern for the foreseeable future. And so are we doing that or not? And if we're not maximizing our use of human capital, if we're not putting people first, then I would argue we're not doing that. We're not sustainable. And we don't have a right really to be talking about ESGs and SDGs until we get that right.
Amen. So, Glenn, love this conversation. Congratulations on the latest book. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
Well, thanks very much, Michael. So LinkedIn is a great place to connect with me. Please take a look at LinkedIn. The book is available on Amazon. We're very grateful. It's become a global bestseller, and I'm really hopeful that we can move the needle. Please take a look at the book, leave a review on Amazon, and if I can help any of your listeners out there, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm very happy to do so. And again, it's great to be here. I really appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you.
I appreciate you and thank you again for all the work you're doing. It's making the world a better place. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks very much, Michael.